The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust. Ceiling fans hummed overhead, but the air felt heavy, like a stage before the curtain rises. The bailiff cleared his throat, and 2 assistants carried in an object draped in plastic wrap. When they set it down on the evidence table, a ripple of nervous laughter ran through the spectators' benches. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't a weapon. It was half a wedding cake. One side was immaculate. 3 tiers, white fondant smoothed with perfection, roses sculpted from sugar, edges lined in silver pearls. The other side was a hollow cavern, frosting torn, sponge layers mauled, crumbs scattering like a crime scene. It looked less like dessert and more like vandalism. Judge Harrison leaned forward, peered down over his glasses, and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "So, we're here because someone ate half a wedding cake?" His chuckle echoed, but the sound jarred against the sharp crack of his gavel. The rhythm didn't match, and the imbalance left a chill in the room, like a joke told at a funeral. The gallery shifted uneasily. The camera, if this were a film, would swing to the plaintiff's side. Elena Rossi, 29. The bride who never got to taste her own cake. Her face burned crimson, not with sugar but with shame. She sat stiff in her navy suit, fingernails pressing crescents into her palm. Her eyes refused to drop, but every laugh from the benches felt like glass pressed into her skin. She swallowed hard. The sweetness that should have been celebration now curdled into humiliation. On the opposite side lounged the defendant, Chloe Miller, 27. Roommate, self-proclaimed best friend, the woman who shared her fridge. She leaned back with theatrical boredom, arms folded, chewing gum loud enough to puncture the air. She smirked at the cake like it was a trophy. The bailiff asked them to stand. They did. Elena's posture was rigid, Chloe's was loose, defiant. "State your names for the record," the clerk said. "Elena Rossi," Elena whispered, then steadied herself, voice stronger. "Plaintiff." "Chloe Miller," came the reply, crisp, almost gleeful. "Defendant." The word defendant should have sounded heavy. Chloe wore it like a joke. Judge Harrison gestured at the evidence. "Ladies, I need to understand how this." He tapped his gavel toward the mauled confection. "Became a case in my courtroom." Then Chloe rolled her gum in her cheek and broke it with a shrug. "It was just cake. She overreacts." Her voice carried easily, bouncing off the marble walls. A couple of spectators chuckled. Chloe basked in it, lifting her chin. Elena's chest tightened. Her nails dug deeper into her palm until she nearly drew blood. Her throat worked, dry. Finally, words scraped their way out. It was not cake. It was my memory." The room stilled. The words hovered like incense, soft but undeniable. They did not win applause, but they cut through the snickering like a violin string struck against drums. For a second, Elena thought of the knife. The silver knife they placed on the evidence table beside the cake. It gleamed under fluorescent light, harmless, yet to her it was the real murder weapon. Not of a body, but of a moment. A memory that should have lived with photographs and laughter was instead carved away by someone who was supposed to protect it. Better they laugh at me now than forget me later. She pressed her lips tight, afraid she'd said it out loud. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, trying to mask the unease behind his earlier laugh. He rapped his gavel again, this time deliberately. "Order. Ms. Miller, Ms. Trey, Ms. Dredd, Rossi, we'll hear testimony." The knife glinted again as the bailiff shifted the evidence tray. For the briefest moment, it looked like a guillotine blade. A flashback formed in Elena's mind. The reception hall only 2 weeks earlier. Strings of fairy lights, her father swaying clumsily during the first dance, her husband laughing with champagne in hand. She had saved the cake for later, for the relatives who couldn't attend, for herself when the chaos of the day was finally over. A tradition, her mother said, to taste sweetness after the vows. But when she opened the fridge that Monday morning, only half remained. The rest devoured, mutilated, stripped from her like pages torn from a diary. She confronted Chloe then, voice trembling. Chloe laughed, frosting still at the corner of her mouth. "Relax. It's just cake." Now that same line echoed in court, weaponized again. Judge Harrison glanced between them, one eyebrow raised. Ms. Miller, is that your defense? That it was just cake? Chloe popped her gum, unbothered. Yeah, she left it there. For days. What's a roommate supposed to do? Watch it rot? Laughter rippled again. Elena clenched her jaw. Humiliation doubled. Not only the theft, but the dismissal, the public minimization. She felt heat crawl up her neck. She wanted to vanish, yet a deeper voice whispered within. Stay. Stand. Don't let them write you off as a joke. She forced herself to meet Chloe's gaze. Chloe's smile widened, cocky. The knife gleamed again, as if waiting. If this were cinema, the screen would fade to black here, with one last exchange burned into subtitles. Chloe, it's just cake. Elena. Then why does it still hurt? The courtroom settled into a buzz as Judge Harrison gestured for the defendant to speak first. Chloe leaned forward, adjusting the lapels of her denim jacket, an outfit that screamed defiance in the sea of business suits. Her gum snapped once before she tucked it under her tongue, the smallest act of rebellion. Your Honor, she began with a practiced sigh, this whole thing is blown out of proportion. She's making me look like a criminal when, in reality, I was just settling a debt. The gallery shifted. A few heads tilted, curious. A debt? Harrison's brow furrowed. Chloe nodded with exaggerated sincerity, like a child caught red-handed and trying to reframe the crime as a moral act. Yeah. Elena hasn't paid her share of rent for 2 months. We're talking hundreds of dollars. She leaves a $1,200 cake in our fridge, untouched, while I'm scrambling to pay bills. I figured, she shrugged, that cake was collateral, a way to even things out. Murmurs rippled through the benches. It wasn't convincing law, but it was a story. And stories stick. From her seat, Elena clenched her fists tighter. Her knuckles blanched, chest rising and falling in shallow waves. She wanted to shout, to cut through the lie before it took root, but something in her told her to wait. To endure. Chloe saw the silence and filled it. She acts like it's the crown jewels. It's cake. Her voice rose, smug. Cake, Your Honor. It's just cake. She repeated it like an incantation, a protective charm. It's just cake. It's just cake. Each time she said it, her voice gathered momentum. A few spectators chuckled. The assistant prosecutor, assigned to observe small claims that day, gave a dismissive smirk, pen tapping against his folder. To him, this was comedy, not justice. Judge Harrison scribbled a note, lips pressed thin. Chloe kept going, enjoying the attention. Look, I even helped her. When her wedding almost got canceled because the caterer was late, who jumped in? Me. I called the replacement staff. I decorated the tables. I even carried her dress bag. And this is the thanks I get? She threw her arms wide, letting the performance land. Dragged into court over sugar. The gallery laughed louder this time, riding the wave of her confidence. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. The sound drowned everything else for a moment. Even the squeak of Daniel's pen 2 rows away. She could feel eyes on her, judging, wondering if she really was being dramatic. Chloe leaned on the rail, eyes glittering. She left it in the fridge for days. If you don't want it eaten, don't leave it. It was a weapon disguised as logic, an argument wrapped in casual cruelty. Elena inhaled sharply but said nothing. Her silence was deliberate, but to the room it looked like weakness. Chloe mistook it for victory. The bailiff shifted the cake knife on the evidence table, the blade catching the overhead light. Again, it gleamed like an accusation, though no one but Elena seemed to notice. Ms. Miller, the judge said, are you admitting you ate the cake? Yes, but with reason, Chloe shot back. It wasn't theft, it was repayment. You can't steal what's already owed to you. The assistant prosecutor chuckled under his breath. A few people in the gallery nodded, some out of sympathy, others out of boredom, eager for entertainment. In a system clogged with heavy cases, this one was a rare spectacle, easy to laugh at. But Chloe wasn't finished. She acts like her whole marriage depends on this. Liddy rolled her eyes. Honestly? If half a cake can ruin her marriage, maybe the marriage wasn't worth it. The line landed like a dagger. Gasps and laughter mingled, the sound ricocheting off the marble. Even Judge Harrison's lips twitched before he stifled it, tapping his gavel once. Elena froze. The words stabbed deeper than the theft itself. Her jaw trembled, her teeth clenched until her temples ached. Her chest heaved, but she didn't speak. She only met Chloe's gaze, unflinching, unblinking. 2 rows back. Clerk Daniel frowned. He was young, maybe 24, assigned to shadow the judge as part of his training. He had spent the morning jotting procedure notes, doodling in the margins to stay awake. But now, he was writing something else. Timeline off, he scrawled. Because in Chloe's speech, she'd slipped. She'd boasted about eating the cake on Tuesday night, after work, when I was starving. But Daniel had skimmed the delivery receipt earlier. The cake was logged as delivered Wednesday morning. A fracture in the wall of lies. Small, but sharp. He underlined his note twice. Chloe, oblivious, kept spinning. She told everyone she was saving it for relatives. Come on, food doesn't last forever. If she really cared about it, she'd have eaten it sooner. She abandoned it in our fridge. I did her a favor. I stopped it from rotting. So? Yeah. If that makes me guilty, fine. But I call it being practical. Again, it's just cake. It's just cake. Each repetition was louder, bolder, like she could drown out the evidence with volume. Judge Harrison rubbed his temple. His laughter from earlier now seemed less certain, like it had curdled into unease. Still, the weight of the room leaned Chloe's way. Laughter swayed crowds faster than logic. Elena sat perfectly still. Only her hands betrayed her, tight, shaking, nails biting into her skin. Her silence was volcanic, but it made her look small, cornered. Chloe basked in it, mistaking control for triumph. Ms. Rossi, the judge said finally, turning to Elena, do you have anything to add at this point? Elena lifted her head slowly, locking eyes with Chloe. Her lids parted but no words came. Not yet. She inhaled, chest rising like a tide held back by a dam. She exhaled. Her hands unclenched, one finger at a time. No, Your Honor, she said, voice steady despite the storm inside. Not yet. The gallery buzzed at her restraint. To them, it looked like surrender. To Chloe, it looked like confirmation of her dominance. She smirked and leaned back, gum popping again. But Daniel, the young clerk, tapped his pen against his notebook, eyes narrowing. He had seen enough hearings to know when a story didn't quite fit. And something about the cake, about Tuesday and Wednesday, wasn't right. Chloe crossed her arms, sealing her testimony with one last sneer. She can call me a thief if she wants, but all I see is someone who can't let go. It's cake, Judge, cake. The mantra again. A wall of words meant to suffocate truth. From her seat, Elena whispered, so softly only she could hear it, it was never just cake. Her words vanished under the hum of the courtroom, but they were seeds. And seeds, once planted, don't stay buried. The judge tapped his gavel. We'll proceed. The knife on the evidence table caught the light once more, the same flash as before, like fate rehearsing its cue. Fade to black. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken after Chloe's final sneer. Laughter still clung to the marble walls like smoke, reluctant to fade. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, weary, pen tapping against his notepad. For a moment, it looked as if the performance had worked. That the defendant's bravado had drowned out the plaintiff's dignity. Then Elena Rossi stood. The scrape of her chair against the tile was not loud, but it sliced through the chatter like a scalpel. Heads turned. She rose not with the jittery nerves of a woman humiliated, but with the poise of someone who had rehearsed silence until it became a weapon. Her hands unclasped, smoothed the folds of her navy suit. Their breathing steadied. She looked less like a bride clinging to a memory, and more like a witness stepping into command. When she spoke, her voice was measured, low, and precise, so different from Chloe's breathless barrage that the contrast itself became dramatic. Your Honor, she began, conversion of property is still conversion, even if it is edible. Stirred. The tone was not emotional, it was legal. The phrase sounded like it belonged in case law, not in a quarrel over frosting. Even Judge Harrison lifted his gaze, his pen frozen mid-tap. Elena continued. The law does not ask whether property is durable, perishable, or sentimental. The law asks whether it was taken without right. And this cake half of it was taken without right. Her eyes flicked to Chloe, whose smirk faltered for the first time. Therefore, Elena said evenly, I am requesting a preservation order for the remaining portion of the cake. It should be stored under court supervision, refrigerated, and protected as evidence until final judgment is rendered. A ripple of surprise coursed through the benches. People exchanged looks. Was she serious? A preservation order for dessert? But the sharpness in her tone suggested this wasn't absurdity, it was procedure. Judge Harrison rubbed his chin. He had heard thousands of pleas, most laced with emotion or complaint. This was different, cool, clinical, informed. Chloe scoffed. You've got to be kidding me. Elena turned slightly, not to Chloe, but to the judge. I am not. The value is monetary, but the principle is legal. If we dismiss this as comedy, we dismiss the integrity of property law itself. The courtroom buzzed louder now, no longer mocking laughter but uneasy murmurs. Chloe's brow furrowed. She hadn't expected Elena to know the right words, to anchor her case not in tears, but in statutes. A flicker of memory passed across Elena's mind. She saw the reception hall from years ago, not her own, but her friend Sophia's. A wedding derailed by betrayal. The groom disappeared on the morning of the vows, leaving nothing but a bill for the vendors and a pile of uneaten decorations. Elena had stood beside Sophia as her friend wept, not only for the lost marriage, but for the stolen memory. Guests whispered. The community laughed. Sophia never took him to court. She swallowed her pain in silence. That silence had haunted Elena. I swore I wouldn't stay silent. Now, standing in this courtroom, she felt the echo of that vow. She faced the gallery directly. Years ago, I saw another bride lose everything to a promise broken. I watched as people laughed, as they said she overreacted, that it was just a party, just a cake, just a dream. I swore I would never let someone dismiss a theft of memory again. Not if I could stand. Not if I could speak. Her words landed differently than Chloe's quips. They weren't flashy, they were deliberate, edged with lived weight. Judge Harrison's fingers drummed slower now, thoughtful. Elena inhaled, the stillness around her amplifying her voice. Cake can be eaten, but boundaries cannot. The sentence hung in the air, heavier than any gavel strike. Even the gum in Chloe's mouth seemed to freeze. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. She's making this into some big speech, she muttered. It's cake, Judge. Cake. But the mantra had lost power. Repeated too many times, it now sounded thin, brittle, like a cracked shield. Elena tilted her head slightly, her eyes unwavering. I know this courtroom better than she thinks. The line was cryptic, intentional. It wasn't just confidence, it was foreshadowing, a warning hidden inside a whisper. Daniel, the young clerk, caught the phrase and looked up sharply. Something about it jolted him. He scribbled faster, noting not only Chloe's timeline slip but also Elena's curious authority. The gallery, which had laughed only minutes before, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The balance of power, once tipped toward spectacle, was tilting subtly but unmistakably. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Ms. Rossi, your statement is unusually formal for small claims. Do you have legal counsel? Elena's lips curved, not into a smile but into something steadier. Not today, Your Honor. Today, I am my own counsel. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. Chloe blinked, startled. Wait, you're what? Elena didn't answer her. She adjusted the papers in her hands, methodical, controlled. Every motion was deliberate, a counterpoint to Chloe's flamboyance. Harrison leaned back, studying her. He didn't know everything yet, but something about this plaintiff no longer looked like a naive bride. Elena sat slowly, but the silence she left behind was charged, electric. The laughter from earlier had curdled into something else. Curiosity, suspicion, even respect. Chloe chewed harder on her gum, jaw tight. She could feel the room's attention slipping. Her mantra, "It's just cake," no longer seemed funny. The spell was breaking. Daniel tapped his pen, circling his note. Timeline off. Rossi knows law. He glanced at her again, a flicker of admiration breaking through his neutral mask. If this were film, the camera would close on Elena's face. Calm, collected, with eyes that no longer belonged to a victim but to someone holding cards no one else could see. Fade to black. Her final words lingering like an omen. Geek can be eaten, but boundaries cannot. The courtroom had shifted once already. Elena's calm legal phrasing had punctured the laughter, left the air heavier than before. Yet most still believed she was just a bride reciting lines she had Googled the night before. A plaintiff with a grudge, nothing more. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, leaning forward. "Ms. Rossi, do you intend to submit further evidence yourself? Or is your counsel present?" Elena didn't sit this time. She reached down, unzipped her leather bag with slow, deliberate precision. The rasp of the zipper dragged across the courtroom like a fuse being lit. From within, she pulled a slim black case. He set it on the table. Lick. The lid opened. Inside lay a card, encased in hard plastic, edges burnished with gold lettering. She lifted it with 2 fingers, holding it aloft as though it were fragile, sacred. The fluorescent light caught the corner, flashing across the courtroom like a blade. Slow motion. The golden trim flared. Up. The letters gleamed. Attorney Elena Rossi, admitted to the State Bar of New York. A gallery froze. A collective inhale rippled through the room. The assistant prosecutor, who had been half smirking, half bored, choked mid-breath, his pen dropping onto the desk. Clerk Daniel's hand slipped, his ballpoint clattering loudly against the floor. The sound rang louder than it should have, like a cymbal in a silent hall. Chloe's jaw fell open, and color drained from her face. She stumbled over her words before she found them. E.R.T. Wait, you're a lawyer. Elena didn't move her eyes from the bench. She let the silence expand, let the revelation do the work. Finally, she turned her gaze to Chloe, steady, unwavering. Her voice was not loud, but every syllable landed like stone. Yes. And I've been listening to your lies long enough. The room tilted. Moments earlier, Chloe had been the aggressor, laughing off the theft, soaking in the crowd's complicity. Now she looked like prey. The inversion was instantaneous and total. The courtroom had changed orbit. Elena the new center of gravity. Daniel, still bent to retrieve his pen, froze in his crouch, staring at Elena as though seeing her for the first time. His notes flashed in his mind. Timeline off. Rossi knows law. Now the puzzle fit. Judge Harrison leaned back slowly, eyes narrowing. You're a licensed attorney? Elena nodded once, sliding the card across the table for the bailiff to collect. Her movements were precise, ritualistic, as though she had rehearsed this unveiling not in practice but in patience. Inside her, words churned she didn't speak aloud. I've practiced law for years, but never for myself. Until today. Her fingers tingled with adrenaline. She remembered the countless times she had stood behind clients, fighting for their rights, their dignity, while swallowing her own. Today was different. Today she was both advocate and plaintiff. Chloe staggered backward a step, bumping into her chair. You tricked me, she spat, her bravado fraying. Elena's eyes did not blink. Her reply was sharp, honed, cutting through the courtroom with surgical clarity. No. You underestimated me. The words landed heavier than any accusation so far. They weren't just for Chloe, they were for the gallery, the smirking prosecutor, even for Judge Harrison. Everyone who had laughed, everyone who had rolled their eyes, had underestimated her. And now they felt the sting. The knife on the evidence table caught the light again, but it no longer looked like a guillotine hovering over Elena's memory. Now it was inverted, turned against the liar. Elena stepped forward, her voice even but carrying further than before. I came here not only as a bride, but as counsel, and what you have heard from Ms. Miller is not testimony. It is fabrication. It is manipulation. It is perjury. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Chloe shook her head, desperation cracking her tone. She can't do this. She can't switch roles. Judge Harrison's gavel slammed once, the sound sharp as thunder. Quiet, Ms. Miller. You will let her finish. Chloe flinched. Elena stood straighter, her calmness now revealed as something far more formidable than composure. It was authority. I was silent long enough, she said, voice quieter now but no less commanding. Today, I sit in the right seat. Her words sank into the bones of the room. Daniel wrote them down verbatim, handshaking. He is sit in the right seat. He circled it twice. It was the kind of line professors quoted in lectures, the kind of line that stuck. The assistant prosecutor, face red, busied himself with his folder, suddenly unwilling to meet Elena's gaze. Judge Harrison adjusted his robe. Proceed, Counselor Rossi. The title, Counselor, echoed in the courtroom, confirming what the golden lettering had already declared. The balance of power had turned. Where Chloe had been performer, Elena was now conductor. Where the gallery had been audience, they were now jury, forced to watch not comedy but revelation. If this were cinema, the camera would linger on Elena's face, calm, resolute, eyes sharpened into focus. Then it would pan to Chloe, wide-eyed, her earlier laughter drained into silence. The gavel would strike once more, but this time in rhythm with the shift, steady, certain. Fade to black on the words that had shattered the facade. Chloe, you tricked me. Elena. No, you underestimated me. The weight of the reveal still hung over the courtroom. Elena Rossi had unveiled herself as not just a humiliated bride, but as Attorney Rossi, licensed, sworn, and unshaken. The balance of power had flipped, and Chloe Miller's smirk had curdled into panic. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Counselor Rossi, you may proceed with evidence. Elena stepped forward, calm but charged. Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to admit several exhibits into the record. The bailiff carried a small projector cart forward, fumbling with the cords until the screen flickered to life against the far wall. The sudden glow illuminated the marble, the gallery leaning forward with the collective hunger of spectators sensing drama. Elena slid a USB drive across. Exhibit A. A recording from the kitchen camera installed in our shared apartment. Chloe's eyes widened. What? Time-stamped, authenticated, Elena continued, her voice precise. Showing exactly how Ms. Sim Miller treated the property in question. The bailiff pressed play. The grainy footage filled the courtroom. The kitchen appeared, late evening, refrigerator door swinging open. Chloe herself stumbled in, still in work clothes, phone in one hand. She flipped open the cake box. The fondant gleamed even under cheap kitchen light. She grinned at her phone's camera, live stream already running. Her voice echoed through the speakers in the courtroom. Look what we got here. Free wedding cake. The gallery gasped. On screen, Chloe cut a slice too big to be called a slice and stuffed it into her mouth. She laughed, cheeks puffed, frosting smeared at the corner of her lips. She tacked a caption across her live stream. Roommate perks. Freeze frame. The caption glowed against her grinning face. Laughter in the courtroom died. Gasps replaced it. Chloe squirmed in her seat. Her fingers trembled, tugging at the hem of her jacket. She refused to meet the judge's eyes. Elena's voice cut through the silence. It was not just sugar. This was memory. Her words fell softer than the video, but far heavier. Elena handed over crisp papers. Exhibit B. The invoice from the bakery. Total, $1,200. Paid in full by me, non-refundable once delivered. The document projected onto the screen. The bakery logo, the date, the bold lettering of non-refundable. Chloe flinched. Her earlier bravado seemed to crumble with every word typed on paper. Elena's voice sharpened. Your Honor, Ms. Miller has claimed she ate the cake as collateral for unpaid rent. The invoice proves this was not hers to consume under any interpretation. Property paid in full, destroyed without consent. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, eyes narrowing toward the defendant. Elena clasped her hands behind her back, her tone measured, almost professorial. In small claims across this state, food theft is still theft. Conversion of property applies whether the item is edible or not. And the data is clear. In 98% of cases, judgments are rendered for plaintiffs in property disputes of this kind. The number appeared on the screen in stark white letters. 98%. Gasps again. Numbers carried weight that words couldn't. Elena continued. 1/3 of roommate disputes involve food or property misuse. Judges have repeatedly ruled that sentimental value does not negate financial value. Theft is theft, the gallery murmured, shifting uneasily. What had seemed laughable minutes earlier was now shaping into precedent, into law, into inevitability. Elena turned toward the evidence table. The knife gleamed again, catching light as if it were waiting. She lifted it carefully, showing it to the courtroom. This knife, she said, was meant to cut a memory into pieces to be shared with loved ones. Instead, it became a weapon of destruction, a tool for violation. She set it back down with a deliberate clang. The echo reverberated, making several in the gallery jump. Chloe's face was pale now, her gum gone, jaw clenching instead. "Your Honor," Chloe burst out, voice cracking, "this isn't fair." "She's twisting it. It was a joke." Everyone knew it was a joke. Her words were wild now, stripped of control. She pointed at the video still frozen on the wall. Her own face, mid-bite, frosting smeared, caption glowing. "Roommate perks." "It was just cake," she shouted. "It's just cake, it's just cake." The mantra spilled from her like a broken record, desperation rather than confidence. But the words, once playful, now rang hollow. The room did not laugh. The gallery sat in stunned silence. Judge Harrison lifted his gavel. "That will be enough. Ms. Miller." The command cracked through the chamber. Chloe's voice broke into a whisper. It was just cake. But even she didn't believe it anymore. Elena stepped closer to the screen. Her shadow stretched across the frozen image of Chloe laughing mid-bite. Her voice softened, but the courtroom strained to hear every word. When something we value is taken, people like to dismiss it. I call it dramatic. They say it's just cake, just money, just a thing. But what they fail to see is that behind every object lies intention, effort, memory. What was consumed here was not frosting, it was trust. What was devoured was not sponge, it was respect. The gallery held its breath. She turned, meeting the eyes of the judge, the prosecutor, even Daniel the clerk. And the law exists not to measure frosting, but to measure fairness. Theft is theft. Boundaries matter. Her gaze fell on Chloe one last time. And no livestream caption can erase that. The silence was thunderous. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the gallery erupted. Not in laughter, but in a storm of whispers, exclamations, gasps. The earlier mocking atmosphere had shattered. What remained was recognition. Daniel's pen flew across his notebook. Every piece of evidence knockout. Knockout. He underlined it 3 times. The assistant prosecutor sat stunned, arms crossed tight, forced to swallow the smirk that had been his mask. Judge Harrison rubbed his chin, then gave a single nod. Exhibits A, B, and C are admitted. The record will reflect. Chloe sank into her chair, eyes darting anywhere but forward. Her hand shook. Her earlier swagger was gone, replaced by the unmistakable weight of defeat. Elena sat, exhaling, but her posture remained upright. She had not just presented evidence, she had orchestrated it like music, each note striking with precision until the room had no choice but to listen. The exhibit still glowed faintly on the projection screen. Chloe's live stream frozen mid-bite, the bakery invoice stamped non-refundable, the bold statistic 98%. The gallery whispered, some in disbelief, some in quiet admiration. Judge Harrison sat straighter now, pen poised. Elena Rossi didn't sit. She stood at the center of the courtroom, her presence calm yet commanding. She let the silence linger until it became heavy enough to demand attention. Then she spoke, not with the sharp edge of accusation, but with the breadth of a lecture, a story meant for more than one plaintiff. This, she said, gesturing toward the frozen image, is not about cake. Her voice cut clean through the rustle of papers and shifting bodies. It's about respect for boundaries. If we laugh at this, we laugh at every stolen memory. If we dismiss this as sugar, we dismiss every person who has been told their loss doesn't count. Clarity stilled. Elena stepped closer to the projector. The slide changed. These are not accidents, Elena said, her tone rising just slightly. This is not a one-off spat between roommates. It is a pattern. The words landed heavy. Pattern. She turned to the gallery, meeting eyes one by one. Let me tell you stories. Not mine, theirs. The slide changed again. No images this time. Just text that filled the room like testimony. A mother, 3 towns over, opened her refrigerator to find it empty. Her ex-husband, bitter after divorce, had thrown out every meal, every carton, every bag. She had spent her last paycheck on those groceries. The court called it property damage, but to her, it was hunger. To her children, it was days of going without. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the back row crossed her arms tighter, nodding faintly. Elena's voice softened, pulling them in. A student at the university upstate lived off government assistance. He kept his food labeled in their shared fridge. Simple staples, rice, beans, peanut butter. His roommate mocked him, called him cheap, and one night filmed himself eating every last can of beans. Video went viral. The student went hungry. He didn't sue. He thought no one would take him seriously. But the theft was real. The hush in the room deepened. Elena let the silence breathe, then continued. They matter because they reveal a truth? What we dismiss as trivial is often devastating to the people living it. This is not an accident. This is a design. Judge Harrison's pen froze at that line. His eyes flicked to Elena with a spark of recognition. This wasn't just testimony, it was thesis. Daniel, the young clerk, scribbled furiously. Not an accident. A design. He underlined it 3 times. Elena moved closer to the bench. Her posture remained upright, her tone steady, but the shift in pronouns was deliberate, unmistakable. I came here today as a bride, she said. But I stand here as something else. Not I, but we. Her eyes swept the gallery. We don't sue for cake. We sue for respect. We don't sue for sugar. We sue because the law must mean something, even when the object is small. Because every time someone dismisses us with laughter, it erodes the very boundaries that keep communities safe. Her words echoed, reverberating. Even Chloe seemed unable to muster interruption. Elena gestured. When property is taken, dignity is taken. When dignity is taken, trust is taken. These are not isolated acts. They are part of a cycle. They strip away not just possessions, but confidence, stability, identity. She paused, voice tightening with controlled anger. And every time we laugh, every time we say it's just cake, we tell victims their dignity is disposable. We tell them their boundaries can be eaten, mocked, live-streamed for clicks. The courtroom was dead silent now. Chloe's earlier bravado seemed almost unthinkable. She hunched in her seat, eyes locked on the table. Her hands fidgeted with invisible threads, knuckles white. Elena turned slightly toward her, not in rage, but in finality. This case began with one cake. White, but it does not end there. Because what happened in that kitchen is happening everywhere. To mothers, to students, to anyone whose boundaries are violated and laughed away. She let the final slide flash bold across the wall. Lenine, this is not an accident. This is a design. The words glowed, undeniable. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his voice lower now, almost reverent. Proceed. But in truth, Elena already had. The gallery erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in murmurs of awe. Some nodding, some whispering, some visibly shaken. Ear had changed. What began as comedy had crystallized into commentary. Daniel dropped his pen again, this time not from surprise, but from sheer momentum of writing too fast. He bent to retrieve it, whispering to himself. We don't sue for cake. We sue for respect. Etch, the courtroom had been transformed. The laughter that once filled the marble chamber was gone, replaced by a heavy silence that felt almost sacred. Every person in attendance seemed to sense that they were witnessing more than a dispute over dessert. They were watching a moment of reckoning. Judge Harrison adjusted his robe, leaned forward, and rested his hands on the bench. Before this court renders judgment, I will permit closing remarks from the plaintiff. Counselor Rossi, you may proceed. Elena rose. Her chair scraped back across the tile, but now the sound carried differently. Not tentative, not defensive, but deliberate, grounded. She stepped forward, not with the fragility of a humiliated bride, but with the quiet weight of someone who had carried silence too long. She placed her hands lightly on the table, then looked directly at the gallery, her voice steady. I once stayed silent when a friend was wronged. I regret it. The words were simple, confessional. The audience leaned in. Elena's eyes softened, recalling Sophia, the abandoned bride, the whispers, the laughter that followed her into the shadows. I watched her memories stolen, dismissed as unimportant. And I did nothing. That regret has followed me for years. She straightened, voice sharpening. But today, I don't. Today, I speak. Today, I stand. And today, I remember. The rhythm in her voice grew. Her words became incantation, hammering truth into the marble walls. Not just cake. Not just money. Not just laughter. Each repetition struck like a drumbeat, anaphora resounding until it seemed to reverberate in the bones of the gallery. This is not about cake. It is about boundaries. This is not about money. It is about respect. This is not about laughter. It is about dignity. She paused, her voice dipping to a whisper that pulled everyone closer. Actions have consequences, and justice is not sweet, it is steady. A hush fell so deep that even the fans overhead seemed to hold their breath. Judge Harrison's gaze softened, his pen resting still. Even the assistant prosecutor, who had mocked at the start, sat motionless, chastened. Clerk Daniel scribbled furiously, writing every word. Elena's final line landed with quiet finality. Justice is not a flavor, it's a boundary. The phrase seemed to hang in the air like a proverb, newly forged, ready to outlive the case itself. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. He leaned forward, eyes stern but not unkind. This court has heard testimony. It has seen evidence. It has listened to argument and rebuttal. He glanced toward Chloe, who sat slumped, eyes bloodshot. Her earlier arrogance dissolved into dread. Ms. Miller, you mocked this case as trivial. But this court cannot treat property rights as trivial, nor boundaries as optional. Theft, whether of money, of possessions, or of memories, remains theft. He tapped his pen against the bench once, twice, then set it down. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that the defendant, Chloe Miller, shall compensate the plaintiff in the amount of $600, half the value of the destroyed cake plus court costs. A collective murmur swept the gallery, a wave of satisfaction, vindication, and awe. Harrison lifted his gavel but hesitated, his lips twitching with something almost playful. And Ms. Miller, let this be a lesson. Refund ordered. And next time... He paused, letting the silence draw taut. Keep your fork out of court. Laughter rippled through the room. Not cruel, not mocking, but cathartic, a release of all the tension that had built. Even Elena smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with the weight of what she had carried. Chloe buried her face in her hands. The gavel slammed down. Judgment entered. The reaction in the courtroom was electric. Some chuckled at the judge's quip, relieved. Others nodded solemnly at Elena's words, the deeper message still ringing in their ears. The balance between humor and gravity was perfect. Laughter for release. Silence for reflection. Daniel, the clerk, dropped his pen again, overwhelmed by the torrent of lines he needed to preserve. He scribbled in the margin, "Justice is not a flavor. It's a boundary." He knew, instinctively, that it would be quoted beyond this chamber, beyond this case, maybe beyond this year. Elena remained standing as the judgment settled over the room. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the gavel echo inside her. The words she had spoken lingered in her chest, not just for the court, but for herself. She had once failed to defend a friend. She had once stayed silent. That silence had haunted her. But today, she had not. Today, she had spoken. Today, she had fought. Her eyes opened, steady, calm. She looked at Chloe one last time, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a clarity that spoke louder than any insult. The case was over. But the lesson would outlive them both. The gavel's echo had faded, but its vibration lingered in every corner of the courtroom. When the bailiff called the next case, no one rose immediately. The gallery was still caught in the aftershock, as though they had witnessed something larger than a judgment. The case of Rossi v. Ukast. Miller was officially over, but outside the walls of the courthouse, its resonance was just beginning. The clip spread before she even left the building. Someone in the gallery had discreetly filmed the projection screen, grainy footage of Chloe in the kitchen, laughing with frosting on her lips, the caption, "Roommate perks," glowing beneath her face. It was spliced with the judge's final line. Refund ordered. And next time, keep your fork out of court. Fried. Within hours, it was everywhere. TikTok, Instagram Reels, Twitter feeds. Memes layered her grin with text. Roommate perks, courtroom jerks. The internet had chosen its villain. Chloe Miller found herself infamous. Employers side-eyed her resume. Friends unfollowed in waves. Her phone buzzed with messages not of support, but of scorn. Some mocked her arrogance, others dissected her lies. A few even thanked her ironically for providing the funniest evidence tape in legal history. But fame built on humiliation is a cage, not a platform. Chloe became a walking meme of failure, branded forever by frosting and entitlement. Elena, by contrast, walked out of the courthouse not just with the judgment, but with something heavier, brighter. Reporters had gathered outside, their microphones a forest of hungry metal. She didn't linger, didn't grandstand. She spoke only a few lines, calm and steady. It was never about cake. It was about respect. Boundaries matter. Justice matters. The soundbite traveled just as fast as Chloe's video. Headlines crowned her. T.S. The bride who fought back. Feature. From cake to court. Elena Rossi turns humiliation into justice. I.S. Attorney. Bride makes history in viral, small claims case. Poor she. For days her inbox filled with messages. Some congratulated her. Others confessed their own small humiliations, moments dismissed as trivial. People who had been laughed at for caring too much now felt vindicated. Acer and Lena read them all. She answered some. She carried the weight of others. And though the praise felt strange, the relief was undeniable. She had not only won the case, she had reclaimed her memory. The case sparked what social media dubbed cake justice. Other tenants, once too embarrassed to sue their roommates, began filing small claims petitions. Stolen groceries, destroyed furniture, vandalized clothing cases that might have been dismissed as petty suddenly felt validated. Law blogs dissected the trial, praising Elena's calm transformation from plaintiff to advocate. Professors assigned the transcript to classes as an example of how personal boundaries intersect with civil law. Some mocked the trend, of course. Late-night comedians cracked jokes about the Great Cake War of 2025. But even those jokes carried the message further. Dignity is not measured by the size of the object lost, but by the boundary it represents. 1 week later, a letter arrived at Elena's apartment. The handwriting was nervous, uneven, the ink smudged in places. Dear Ms. Rossi, I was the clerk in the courtroom that day. I don't know if you noticed me. I was the one who dropped my pen twice. Watching you stand, watching you turn laughter into silence, changed me. Today, I decided to study civil rights law. Not because of textbooks, but because of you. Istine. Thank you for reminding me that boundaries matter. That voices matter. That silence doesn't have to last. E.S. Daniel Carter. Elena read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, tucking it into the back of her case files, not as evidence, but as a reminder. Another message came through social media. This one from a woman she had never met. Because of you, I'm suing my ex for destroying my wedding dress. He said it was just fabric. He said I was dramatic. But you reminded me that memories count, and boundaries deserve protection. Thank you. Elena stared at the message for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. She whispered the words aloud. Just fabric. The phrase felt eerily parallel, a ghost of just cake. She typed back only 2 words. Stand firm. Weeks later, a new plaque appeared in the courthouse hallway. Bronze letters gleamed against polished wood. The Hall of Boundaries. The dedication ceremony was small. Just clerks, a few judges, and Elena herself, who attended quietly, almost reluctantly. The plaque was not about cake, nor about one case. It was about the idea that even the smallest property disputes carried dignity within them. That laughter could not erase loss. That boundaries, once drawn, deserved respect. Reporters snapped photos. The image of Elena standing beside the plaque traveled as far as the video of Chloe eating frosting. But this time, the symbol was not humiliation. It was resilience. Late one evening, Elena sat at her kitchen table, staring at the remains of her case file. The invoice. The photos. A still image from Chloe's livestream, frozen in mocking laughter. I won the case. But I also won back my memory. The thought settled in her chest, warm and steady. The cake itself was gone, but the victory was not about frosting or sponge. It was about reclaiming what had been taken, the right to be heard, the right to draw a line and see it honored. She whispered to herself, almost as prayer. Justice is not sweet. It is steady. In cafes, in classrooms, in offices, people repeated her lines. Some mocked them, some quoted them with sincerity. But either way, they spread. Not just cake, not just money, not just laughter. The phrase became a meme, but also a mantra. A caption under photos of ruined belongings. A rallying cry in roommate disputes. Even a sticker on laptops. Boundaries matter. And somewhere, a young student, newly emboldened, filed his first small claims petition against a landlord who had dismissed him. Somewhere, a mother demanded restitution for groceries tossed out in spite. Somewhere, silence cracked open, replaced by voices. The courthouse doors swung open, and the roar of voices crashed against the night air. Reporters surged forward, microphones jabbing like spears, cameras flashing in a storm of light. The marble steps glowed beneath the barrage of bulbs. Every step Elena Rossi took magnified into history. She paused halfway down, the gavel's echo still alive in her chest. Chloe Miller had slipped out a side door, shrouded in shame and mockery, but Elena walked straight into the spotlight, shoulders squared, breath even. The first reporter shouted, "Ms. Rossi, was it worth it for just a cake?" The question hung like bait, waiting for mockery. Elena lifted her gaze, calm but fierce. She leaned into the microphone sea, her words precise. "Silence only feeds injustice," she said, voice ringing clear. "Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story, so no one ever laughs away what you lost." The crowd hushed. The quote cut sharper than the camera flashes. "Outking flew. What do you say to those who still think this was petty?" Elena didn't flinch. She turned, this time looking not at the reporters, but directly at the nearest camera lens. Her eyes locked, piercing through glass, through screens, through living rooms and phone screens across the country. And in that moment, she broke the wall. "If you're watching this," she said, voice soft but unshakable, "maybe someone dismissed your pain as a joke. Maybe they told you it was just fabric, just furniture, just food, just cake. Hear me, your memory counts. Your boundaries count. Share this story." The camera zoomed closer. Her face filled the frame, steady, vulnerable, resolute. She inhaled slowly, her words now. A rhythm, a mantra. Leg, back up your boundaries. Back up your stories. Back up your life. The crowd leaned forward, silent, as though the words weren't just hers, but theirs. For a heartbeat, she thought of Sophia, her friend whose silence had once been mistaken for weakness. She thought of the stranger's message about the ruined wedding dress. She thought of Daniel's letter, his decision to study civil rights law. She thought of every voice that had been laughed down, erased by mockery. She was no longer just speaking for herself. She was speaking for them. Her voice rose, steady as a gavel strike. Actions have consequences. And today, consequence tasted like justice. Elena let the noise wash over her, but she didn't add more. He had said enough. Words carefully chosen, cut clean, left space to echo. As the crowd roared, Elena turned slightly, gaze lingering on the nearest lens one last time. Her eyes softened. Not for the press, not for the memes, but for the unseen audience who would watch later in silence. "This isn't about me," she whispered, her words almost lost under the swell of voices. "It's about you. Don't let them laugh your memories away." She stepped down the final stair. The cameras followed, but the moment had already crystallized.